Hey guys, Trey Bender here with Program Stories, and today I'm sitting here with Miss Emily Pitt. And Emily, you went to a program called Turnabout.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay, how old were you when this happened, and what year was it?
I was 12 and it was November 14th, 2000. It was the day I got put in. So,
Wow. So, what led to your getting sent there?
there was a few things. I had been in a program previous to that as well, called Copper Hills Youth Treatment Center.
Okay.
Um, Ultimately, I ended up leaving that for insurance reasons. And then my parents sent me to Turnabout. I was not doing well in school. I was struggling with bad grades. I had been caught drinking one time, and that was pretty much the catalyst. So, and
Really?
we didn't get along. My parents and I just never got
Ah, I get that. I get that. Okay. So, were you taken voluntarily or were you escorted?
along. A little bit of both. My parents took me in for a tour of the building, and I
I've
just
heard,
got,
I've heard that story. I've heard that that's a common thing that has happened.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
So when you first got there, like what's running through your mind?
Um, it had been kind of sold to me as like this summer camp sort of experience by my parents. So I was kind of expecting a combination of, actual summer camps that I had been to, and then like the hospital environments that I had been in previously. It was not. It was kind of it was not that at all. So yeah, that
It was
was what I was
not
expecting.
okay. So
Yeah.
it wasn't what it was made out to be.
No, not even a little bit. No.
Okay. When you first got there, what's the first thing that happened?
So they do a tour with the parents and the child at first and kind of go through everything. They make sure all the kids are in a different area. So the parents, as they're coming through and touring these areas, they're never normally allowed in. The kids can't be there to be seen. I think for a lot of obvious reasons, and maybe
Yeah,
you know,
I imagine that.
right. And then they're like, "Okay, do you want to go?" And it's like you're there and you're 12, and it's you're like, "Well, yeah, it's I get to go ride horses and have sleepovers with kids that I was an only child, so I was told like, oh, you get to hang out with like older teenage girls. I was only 12, and that was a big selling part for like what my parents tried to do. So I got there, we did that, and then they just kind of dropped me in the middle of a big group, and my parents took off and they're like, "Okay, see you soon." And I wouldn't talk to them for another year and a half after that. I wouldn't see him for another year. So yeah.
So you kind of got tricked into going, huh?
Oh yeah, definitely. It wasn't. I don't. Well, I think to some degree my parents were a little tricked into like what they were buying too. To be, I mean, that much fair to them. But yeah, no, it was not what the brochure said. No.
Not what the brochure said. All right. So you got dropped off like that, and then did they just kind of explain it to you how what really was happening, or what happened
No,
then?
no. So like a lot of programs, I wasn't allowed to talk. Um, but they have to give you orientation. Like one of the higher levels has to give you orientation before you know those rules. So we're in the middle of big group ends. I'm weirded out because everybody jumps out of their seats. They're not allowed to sit in chairs because there's no adults in the room. Staff's gone, group's over. So now we're all sitting on floors. I'm being held on to by my hands, and everybody's dead silent. I'm used to middle school. I'm like, what is going on? And like everybody starts picking up tiny pieces of garbage off the floor. And I was like, do I do this? Like, what are we doing? I was so confused. And so I looked at the girl that was like holding belt looping me next to me. I said, am I supposed to help? And she screams, safety issue. She's talking to me. And like an older turns into this big thing, like a upper level comes over and is like, you can't talk, you can't. And I'm just like, I mean, yeah, it was really bizarre. That was like, I remember just thinking like, oh no. Oh no, almost immediately. Yeah. Like,
I would imagine. I would imagine so. I would
yeah.
imagine that you were definitely freaking out.
Yeah.
Was there a point and level system, and how did that work?
So yeah, so it was kind of I mean, it's really similar to a lot of places. You start at level 0. The highest level is a level 5. Very few people graduated as level 5s. I think in the 3 years that I was there, less than 5. I know that, probably around 3. Um, and then in addition to that, they had a different system for housing. So we didn't actually, it wasn't residential on paper. we went we were fostered out to other homes of the other parents. So you wouldn't go to your own home for the first little while. You would go to somebody else's house whose parents had kids in the program. Um, so there was a whole different ranking system for that, and that was A through C. So you would be like your rank. It was like a 2A or a 2B or a 2C or a 0C out of house. It was your in-house or out of house, A through C, and then also 0 through 5. So I mean, it was, and some of them went hand in hand, but not all. So you could get any combination, and you had to keep up with what rules applied to what status as well too. So yeah,
Wow. Jeez.
yeah, it was a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so how was punishment doled out?
Uh,
Was it by the staff? Was it by the other students? A mix of both?
a mix of both. So it was directed by staff. So we would get our consequence. They were never punishments. They were always very clear that we never could use the word punishments. These were consequences of our actions.
Okay.
So I still balk at that today, even though I know that's not
Yeah,
what it was,
yeah,
right?
because when I was there, that's how it was in my place too. They weren't punishments; they were corrections.
Mhm.
They're like,
Yes.
we're correcting your bad behavior. That's what they call it.
Yeah, nothing was punitive ever. Nothing was like the fault of the program. You earned whatever,
yeah,
you know. So it was weird. We would have big group in the morning, and there would be either slips from the homes from the parents the night before, or slips from the kids. I forget now. I know write-ups, I think, are what the kids did, and then pink slips were what the parents gave. And inevitably, I always had one for probably the first 3 to 6 months I was in there. And they would keep track of them. So your job was they would read this problem, this issue that somebody wrote about you breaking a
okay,
rule or being
gotcha.
sneaky, right? And then it was your job to raise your hand, and you had to take responsibility, which had a formula to it. And then you had to offer up what consequence you thought you should have. But so that was always the formula. And I mean, you could never get it right. It was built to be impossible to do correctly the first couple times you did it. So you inevitably within your first month would end up with a couple consequences of some sort. I am bullheaded and did not learn quickly, and ended up with so many that it became very obvious that they were never going to be able to be completed. I mean, like one of their favorite things was essays. And at one
Yeah,
point, I think
oh yeah, I remember that too. I got that.
handwritten, right? And they counted.
Oh yeah, I got a lot of that.
But like I had I think at one point I had over 2,500 word essays that I needed to turn in. They and when I mean they would get outrageous with some of them. One staff member in particular, she was really mean, and she would give you like a 5,000 word essay on the importance of manhole cover. That was one of her favorite things that you had to write about, and it was
How does she
so
expect somebody to write 5,000 words
no,
about
that's like
a
yeah.
manhole cover? I don't understand that.
Well, and that's a common one for like going to the bathroom when you weren't supposed to, right? Outside of the times that they allotted. So you could always go. That was always the thing. Oh, you always can do what you need to do, but there's going to be a consequence. You know what I mean? And so it's just like you chose what you had to do. But yeah, I mean, like generally it'd start with those write-ups, or like if I mean, like the staff would sometimes call things out if they saw things going on, which was rare. But I also got written up by parents frequently. That it became I was really unfortunate, and a lot of the people that I've contacted since then have identified and really come to acknowledge that they scapegoated me a lot in the program. Like I was the youngest, I was having a hard time understanding and keeping up with like 16 and 17-year-olds. And
Yep.
so the staff scapegoated me, the kids started to scapegoat me, then the parents jumped on the bandwagon. And before long, it was like I could never do anything right anywhere I went. And that gets
Okay.
old.
I do get that because a lot of that happened to me too, and I relate on that entirely.
Yeah.
You had spoken about something called big group.
Yes.
Tell us
Yeah.
what that is.
So big group happened in the mornings. We always had the same schedule Monday through Friday, and also Saturday had its own unique schedule as well. But big group happened in the mornings, and it was everybody that was in the program, and it was run by a different staff member each day of the week. Some were better than others, and then we would do generally, write-ups and things like that. That was the first thing we got out of the way every morning, no matter what. We dealt with handing out consequences. That was like first order of business. And then if we had time, we would work on somebody who needed to like share their autobiography. So you'd have to share your autobiography to get in house. You'd have to read it, much like AA style. You would have to read this inventory to your parents in front of the parent group, which is a whole different thing, in order to go in house. But before you could do that, you had to read it in big group and get critiqued on it and get approved to then present it to your parents. So there's like many steps to being able to ever see your parents or go back home again. And that was like, if we had time, we would get around to the other things. But the main point of big group was to deal with consequences, it felt like. And then small group in the afternoons was where we would go out with our individual counselors that we were assigned in smaller groups individually, out in these 4 different groups. And it varied. I mean, it could be so all over the place. Sometimes they'd combine them. Sometimes there wouldn't be enough staff available to do that. So they'd have another big group, but consistently big group happened every morning. Consequences were dealt out every morning. So,
Okay. By consequences, can you tell us a few things that would get you a consequence? Like, tell us some ridiculous things that you can think of that a normal person would look at you and think, you're serious? Like, tell us this.
So, I told you we were unique in that we would be transported between the main building and to people's homes. So part of this was being secure, right? Like we had to be secured. So we were belt looped on each side in the beginning. All our shoelaces were removed, tongues flipped out, things like that. Things that are normal in a lot of
that too, yeah.
a lot of places, right? That do that. So you're like, okay. But then the other thing is that we wore a uniform it was a polo, so it had 3 buttons right here, and the instruction was, yeah, kind of like what you have. Yeah, a lot actually, same color and everything. Oddly enough, but
oh wow,
yeah.
Let's grab this out to wear.
I mean, I still can't wear khaki pants to this day because of the program. I still hate khaki pants, and I think we all have those weird aversions, but that's one for me.
I do, because I remember this tie I had to wear, and I've like seen this style tie, and I'm just like, man, I hate this tie.
Immediately, it comes like right back. You're like, oh, I know that. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. So, but we had to look at these buttons in the car ride anytime. So as soon as we left the building, we were directed to look down, and not just with like our head and not just like at our stomach or our belt, but like at these buttons specifically. And if your eyes moved off those buttons at any point between when you left the door of the building to when you got inside and were secured at the home, you were automatically put in run. You were run risk. So you were put in run clothes, which were these bright orange clothes. I seriously think they just went to like the local. We have here in Utah, Deseret Industries DI, which is like the LDS version of Goodwill, and so I'm pretty sure they went there and grabbed a bunch of like it meant to be embarrassing, grungy looking secondhand clothes that were plain, no script. Took them somewhere, dyed them orange with like RIT, right? Like they didn't. This is not a professional. Like I'm telling you, these guys were not like the high class, like they were doing it on a budget. And so then they just would shove all these clothes in this locker in our shared locker room. And you would have to give, so you're run risk. So now you got to give up all your clothes. You don't get to have a bag, which means you've got to learn how to carry all your stuff in your sheets at night. You got to like wrap it up and turn it into a bag. And you're then constantly belt looped all the time, unless you're in the shower or going to the bathroom or in bed for the next 72 hours. And I mean, that one, it was almost like a rite of passage, that one, because how could you not, like, how could you understand how strict they are being in the beginning as a child when you show up and they're like, look at that button and don't move it. No room for error, none, zero at all. And so everybody kind of went through that. It was shocking if you didn't go through that within the first week of being. So, yeah.
Was attack therapy ever used in group? And if it was, how so? Like, how would you explain attack?
So attack therapy was something that they used. So the program was around since 1988. I did a little research on them once I started looking into this. And they were more of a boot camp style from the beginning in 88. And really, from what I can tell, based off of the kids model, because there was Kids of Salt Lake City that rebranded, and they're pretty much sister programs to what is now Lifeline. And so one of the things that we dealt with there Sorry, I got a little off track on that. I apologize. What was the question again? I'm so sorry. I'm a little nervous, so I forgot.
How was attack therapy used?
Attack therapy. Sorry. Yeah, this is it's a hard subject, so I think that's
Oh,
why
I know. Yeah, I know.
my brain wants to jump and go elsewhere.
Oh, I get that. I get that entirely.
Right. It's embarrassing, but I think we all go through it. It's like,
Yeah,
oh
we do.
yeah,
I do that all the time. Trust
yeah. So attack therapy was used a lot in the beginning. By the time I got there in 2000, they were using it very little. I was the last person that they ever did an attack therapy session on.
me. Okay. How?
In
What did this session consist of?
it was called a grouping, and it's very similar to what you've seen in a lot of the documentaries. I was put in a corner, and everybody was told to just say whatever they wanted, and they generally tried to keep things kind of like, you know, at least presentable. I mean, like at least, like I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it was never like you see in some of the documentaries from things in the 70s. They had matured by the 20s where they knew they couldn't be saying some of these, like, you can't be swearing at kids. You can't be calling them idiots and like names and stuff like that. But in this particular one circumstance, it wasn't the staff that was doing it. They'd let the kids express how they felt because the person, in this case me, was doing so poorly in the social model of the group. It was harming the group. And so the group needed to tell me how they felt. And
How old were
so
you?
I was 12 the first time, I was 13 the second time. And as a matter of fact, the second time I didn't recall until I was probably about 26. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was in with me. And she said, I really hated those groupings. They made me cry. She goes, your second one especially was bad. And I said, what second one? It took me a good solid 3 weeks of processing with the therapist to be like, oh my God. Oh my God. I had completely, it just wasn't even, I mean, it wasn't even in my brain. I can tell you about it now. I processed it through EMDR and like, and really worked on it, but it was so traumatic that it took me 11 years after leaving and a good 13 years after it happened to even recall it again. So yeah, it was bad. And I think that they knew that it got way out of hand. I started to physically fight back and the staff held me down. So I was being held down physically by the staff and being yelled at by the staff and the kids, trapped in a corner, just like really bad stuff. And that was the first one. I'm not even talking about the second one. That was the first one. And so um, they realized, I think, that this was not something they could get away with anymore. It
Sure.
traumatized besides me, and I was the target. So yeah, yeah, that one was hard.
Was restraint used as punishment or only as a last resort? Like,
No, no, no,
how
no,
was
no.
restraint used? Was the staff, and did you ever see the staff enjoy doing that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a couple. I mean, this is a place where we would have staff come in and they'd leave 3 weeks later because they'd get fired for not being able to be mean enough. And I'm quite serious. So, like, yeah, it was used a lot. Their whole thing that they touted is, well, we never use chemical or physical restraints, like mechanical restraints, right?
Yeah.
But they did absolutely love using pressure points. And they were very well taught that, this is the way the thing where I was told is, we're not hurting you. We're just like keeping you compliant. Like, this is what the police do. But it was also like for things like talking or not keeping your hands on your knees when you were told to 5 times in a row, or just really just things that you shouldn't be hurting kids over. I mean, like, and that was, one time in particular, I didn't want to empty my bag, so we got searched every day coming in and out of the building, and I didn't want to do it. I think it was like maybe 2 weeks in, I was in run clothes. I was like, I was in a bad spot 2 weeks, and I was like, oh my God. Then I refused to empty my bag because I felt like, I don't know. I can't even tell you what my reasoning was, but I got tackled. So I was 12 years old. I was probably about 5'3", maybe 110 pounds, maybe. And I was tackled by a staff member who was well over 6 foot and used to be like a football player. And I remember it because I don't remember being tackled, but I remember waking up because he hit me into the ground so hard it knocked me out. Um, and that was, I mean, that was 2 weeks in, right? And
Yeah.
so, there, that was probably the most severe one. And he actually left pretty soon after that. But
I
yeah,
want to
that was
ask you this. You speak about a man that size. Why was somebody like that working with young women?
I don't know. Well, we were mixed. We were co-ed.
You were
So
co-ed. Okay, I was going
we
to
were
get to
co-ed.
that. So you were allowed to look at boys and
Yeah. So you
around.
could be put with boys. Like you could definitely get yourself in a place where that was a consequence. You can't look at the boys, you can't talk to the boys, you can't get near the boys. And a lot more often, quite honestly, the boys got put on no girls and the girls got put on no boys. But um it was bad. Yeah. And it caused a lot of issues for one particular 6 month stretch, actually. They didn't have enough, they had so many boys acting out and in isolation that they didn't have enough boys that were like doing well to sit on their isolation. So they started having some of the upper level girls do it, and staff even. That was how bad it was. And there were certain young men, they just refused to place ladies on their like watch because they would say it was just bad. It was just really, really bad. It was just a lot of really, I mean, it was just a lot of repression too. It was, so the director of the program for a long time did conversion therapy too. So there was a strong element of like, I mean, it was Utah in the early 2000s, late 90s.
Oh yeah, I would have expected that,
Right.
especially in Utah back then, back
Yeah.
when conversion therapy was a big, big thing.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of like heteronormativity that was really projected and told that was our only option. I remember one of my most distinct memories is one staff in particular. Oh my God, she was bad. Yelling at one of our kids he'd come out as bisexual. And he came from a very conservative religious family. They weren't LDS, but very
Yeah.
conservative LDS family. Immigrants, like culturally, this was not acceptable at all. What he was doing was very risky and brave. And I remember her screaming at him, you can't be bisexual. That's not a thing. You're either gay or you're straight. And if you're not going to pick, you're just a fucking slut. And it's just like, wow. Oh, like, I mean,
She
like
called a boy a
a
slut.
16-year-old boy. He was 16, yeah. 16 or 17, but yeah, I remember.
Wow.
A good friend of mine ended up dating him later. I mean, like, you know what I mean? I actually knew him quite well outside of the program later on, but like, it was not an easy thing for him to say.
I'm sure it wasn't, and especially back then. I mean, you didn't come out about that back then.
No,
You just didn't.
no. I don't even remember what brought about him even admitting to this. I think it was one of those like, it was a cop group, like, y'all are being dishonest. Somebody's not talking about something. And he was like, and I'm sure that he probably felt like this was something he was carrying. That was not the reaction he should have
No,
gotten. Even in 2000, I don't think that was an appropriate or expected reaction from a lot of people.
no. I mean, I remember being young back then, and back then, even back then, you couldn't be open about that. It
No.
was, and being open about it was just inviting uh, ridicule,
Yeah.
and back then, yeah, it was.
And I hate to say it, but especially even more so for, I think, a young man than a young woman, it was
Yeah.
really, really
Yes. Yeah.
unfortunate, but true.
Yeah, because I remember I was young back then and I saw that happen.
Yep. I mean, I am guilty myself of, I think, spewing some pretty gnarly stuff while I was in there, just because that's what I was taught, So
I
yeah,
wouldn't
I
say
actually
that I
reached out
was taught that, but I did see a lot of it happen to other people who would come out about that. I
I
did.
think the one that was really hard was I actually had a conversation. I'm actually gonna grab a cough drop really quick. Just give me just 1 sec. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So we good?
Yeah, we're fine. We're fine.
Okay, good. So I actually a year ago reached out to the staff member that yelled that at him and talked to her because she was let go of the program because the state came in and this is things I've heard secondhand. So this is nothing I know for sure, but what I've heard secondhand is um, the state came in and did an investigation, and her name came up very consistently for things that were just way out of line. And so I reached out to her just a year ago, when I started kind of getting into this stuff and exploring it. And she told me she did not remember saying that to him. She said, but knowing who I was back then, I don't doubt that I said it. And I am deeply sorry. She, she actually said that she was waiting for my phone call specifically, and I was not the first one that had reached out to her. She was not nice, you know what I mean? And I mean, I really am glad that she's changed, but the people that were still running it when I was there, there's a lot of them are still running it now. And I just can't imagine it's much better. I
I
can't.
can't either. I
You know,
can't either.
so
I want to ask you this. You said that you were in this program for 3 years, right? During that 3 years, how was communication with your parents restricted? Were you able to call them on the phone anytime you wanted, or did you only have to? Were you only allowed to write letters? Like how would you communicate with
um I didn't. So the parents were required to attend if they were in state, attend a parent group. And if they were out of state, they started setting up video conferencing way back then, which was a pretty big deal, honestly. But
Video conferencing back then was very different than it is today. Very expensive and very not the norm.
no, and
Like,
also archaic in comparison to what we're
oh,
doing
very
now.
much so. I remember seeing it. I never did video conferencing until like recently.
We were in 2002 about that time, but still, I mean, staying anyway. So you would go to parents group on, for me it was Mondays, I think, for a long time. I can't remember anymore, but Monday through Thursday they would have parent group because there were 4 smaller groups, and the
Mhm.
parents from each small group would go to those. The Dr. Hinckley, he still runs it. I don't feel uncomfortable saying his name. He ran it along with your therapist, and then also the parents would be there for. So it was a long group too. It was like parents had to commit to, I think, 2.5, 3 hours once a week to this group. So the first half would be just the parents, and then the second half would be us coming in and having group with them. And that's when you would get the opportunity for somebody to like read their inventory to their parents, where you had to tell them anything illegal, immoral, or against their wishes that you had ever done your whole life. And so, um, you know, that's how you got in house. And even when you went to these groups once a week, you were not allowed to look or talk to them if you were not in house. And if you weren't, you couldn't, because you might give them puppy dog eyes and manipulate them into pulling you with one look. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure your parents don't make this decision lightly. It's not a small investment. So it's just kind of like funny to say it now that like with one look, you would get them to just be like, oh, and like they would come rescue you. I mean, that's not how it works, but we weren't allowed to talk to them on the phone ever. The only way you could communicate with them out of house was to write a letter that you then had to read out loud to the group, and they had to approve it to make sure that you said nothing negative or even could be construed as negative about the program, because then you were manipulating them to pull you. You were, yeah, talking poorly. And then once you got in house, you weren't allowed to go home by yourself until you got home alone status. And that took a long time. So for the first probably like 6 to 8 months, I would say, when you were going home, you would have another person from the program there with you at all times. So, and if you were talking to like a phone on the, if you were out of state, like you weren't from Utah, you would be placed in a host home. So I had a host sister for a year as well. She was from California. And if you called your parents on the phone, someone else had to be listening as well. And so you never were allowed alone with your parents until you were so far into the program, you were indoctrinated and committed to like seeing it through and leave. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Do you feel like you were brainwashed into thinking that you had to complete this, or what were your thoughts on it?
Complete the
Because,
program.
yeah, completing the program, were you brainwashed into thinking you had to do that, or were you faking it? Like, what would you say?
That's interesting. So I think my experience was different than a lot of people's in this particular program, in that
How
I
so?
quit talking back or being snotty or like, whatever they want to call it. I never quit acting out. So I never actually graduated the program. What happened was, and I wanted to, as a matter of fact, for years later, even far into adulthood, I struggled with the fact that I didn't graduate the way everybody else did, as I was like some sort of failure. Because what happened is they put me in at 12. I'd already spent 9 months in another much more intense program from 11 to 12. By the time August, about May, July of 2003 was rolling around, we're looking at me now being there for 3 years. And my parents have invested a lot of money, and they're starting to finally be like, guys, like, what's going on? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why is she not progressing? And I think they were quickly understanding that I was becoming institutionalized, much like a prisoner, like that's
Yeah.
held for like many years. I was starting to become incapable of functioning outside of these very strict sort of in like therapeutic, environment, like incarceration environments, basically. And so
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah. And so I think they got very concerned that my parents were seeing this and that they were going to be called out. So they basically said, you're not able to do the program. And so we're going to create a specialty sort of like, um, I don't know, expedited program to get you out of here by August. And they threw out almost all the rules of the program and wrote this one for me. Like I didn't have to not talk. I mean, there was a lot of things that were taken off of me that were just I was never going to be able to comply with. And I think they knew that. Um, and it's almost like, oh, if you treat a child like a person and a child, like they'll want to thrive and not just give up every day. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
who would have ever thought? I know, right?
Right? When you don't lock them in closets and ignore them and feed them, rotten food and shit, and like let them go to the bathroom when they need to. Amazingly, they bloom like flowers. Like, okay, I mean, come on, guys. Like, this was just, it seemed like, how did we take 3 years to get to this point? And I have people from the program that reach out to me occasionally or have more so in the past. It's been a long time now, where they'll go, I always admired how you never gave in, how you always said, F you, like, I'm not going to do it. And it's like, guys, it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't a choice. And I'm not super proud of it because if I had just bit my tongue, I could have been out of there in a year. But
Hey, I want to tell you something. Um, I never submitted. I was always defiant the entire time I was there. I made zero progress because of it. I literally, let's just say, my parents never exactly got any good news on their weekly calls. That's for
yeah,
sure.
exactly. Yeah. So
So, but they still kept pumping money into it because they were just as brainwashed as they were trying.
I think, well, yeah, I mean, I talked to my parents and I actually more so talked to the director. I kind of like surprised him one day last year when I was calling around, just like, oh my God, like, and I was reading reviews of the program. There was a review that somebody had left that was obviously very hurt by what had happened to them in there. And the director in a PR-ish, very like, ugh, it makes me gross, feel gross, had written back to him and been like, here's my number if you want to talk. I'm so sorry. It sounds like you were here in one of our earlier models. And I remember thinking, I want to talk. So, so I called him and I didn't expect to get through to him. And surprisingly, I did very quickly. I just had to ask, I went through one receptionist. All of a sudden, I was on the line with him. And I didn't really know what I was going to say. I hadn't planned this. It just kind of like all of a sudden, my trauma had just like run me up to this and been like, hey, here you go. I heard his voice and I remember I had to mute the phone because I had to throw up. I actually physically threw up when I heard his voice at 33 years old. I mean, I got out when I was 15. And um I remember asking him just like so many questions. I'm like, man, like if you I just you guys never you always said you were the last stop. And then I come back at 23 and I talk to you guys about how nothing you did helped me. And I get told, well, you were one of the first people to come through that probably had, serious depression or anxiety or like, bipolar possibly. They hadn't diagnosed me at that point. They tried to. Unfortunately, they did it very inappropriately. And again, even the diagnoses were used for punitive action. So we were given like really extreme diagnoses that just didn't really ever fit. And so I asked him, I said, if you were incapable of helping me and you knew that, why did you keep me? Why did you not refer me out if you knew your program wasn't working? And he just kind of sputtered. He was like, I don't have an answer. And the threat was always like, if you leave here, the only other place you can go is the state hospital. And that means your parents have to sign over custody and you'll never, people never get out of there. And it's just like, I mean, I didn't break ever all the way, but I did see some people that did, and they got pulled because they went catatonic. Like literally, one girl in particular, she quit eating. She started getting trichotillomania, where she would eat her own hair, and then she started like just
Wow.
becoming incontinent. She was 14, and it was like, holy crap! Like this is so heavy. Do you know what I mean? And they just refused to ever tell her parents, we can't do it. They sold every parent that they were the solution for everything. And that's what probably makes me the most angry is like, you guys are still doing this. And like now they're mixing with mental health programs and, saying, oh, we offer EMDR. And, I'm like, but listen, I still have kids that are coming to me saying I graduated in 2020 that tell me that the same things are happening. So you can put it on whatever you want. But like ultimately, everything they've done is still a real similar. It's just it's so sad that um they take scared parents and tell them, yeah, we can do it.
Yeah, yeah. Especially back then, it
Yeah.
was scared parents were a big thing back then.
Yeah, there was a lot of
I
moral panic going on in the 80s and 90s for
Oh
sure.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, that's how it bloomed and thrived, and it
Of
is kind of
course, of course. That's how my family got sucked right into it. You
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Do you ever feel like you missed out on certain rites of passages at that age?
Yes.
Well,
I mean, so many. I can't even. It's so strange because I have a 14-year-old now, and it is bizarre because I have to tell him, buddy, you've got more formal education than I do. Um, like and this is. I know that sounds really weird, but we didn't ever. I mean, the schooling in there was a joke. It was so bad. And by the time I got out and went to high school, um, first of all, if you spend 3 years of your life in that kind of especially in that developmental stage,
yes.
right? Not being able to see any more than like 40 people at a time. And then you get out and they drop you into the middle of a suburban high school that has 4,000 students. Um, you become overwhelmed really quickly, right? Like, I mean, and that was just like one of many things. I think the one that's probably the most sad to me is that um, I feel like if I had been given the chance to explore more like artistic sort of activities at that age, I would have something now that really feeds my soul as a hobby, such as pottery or painting or writing or something like that. But because,
I can get that. I can
yeah,
get.
all that was kind of like told we weren't allowed to do it and kind of stunted down. I still collect art prints. I'm very left brained, but I don't have any talent of my own that I was ever able to develop or feel comfortable being bad at this age. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I know that
I
sounds
think
silly,
I
but like,
do. No, it doesn't sound silly at all. It sounds like
yeah, we weren't
exactly.
allowed to doodle or draw. We weren't allowed to talk about music or hum or sing. We weren't allowed to play sports. I mean, those are the types of things that in middle school, that's where you're really learning, like
Yeah.
I think that I am I'm not good at flirting. I can argue with you all day, but like I like those are the interactions you kind of like learn your boundaries, as in middle school is like, like what you like, that's when you start to like be interested in the opposite sex and like, those sort of things or the same sex or whatever. That's when your sexuality starts to really bloom, right? No, that was so like you couldn't even look at a boy the wrong way. We weren't allowed to touch them, be within 3 feet of them. I mean, this is I'm not to say like you should just have, but it was just it really stunted me, I think. And then education wise, by the time I got to high school, going back to that, I remember sitting in geometry class, and I was in geometry class. The geometry class teacher was the football coach, and I had somehow ended up in the football and cheerleader class period that he taught. I don't know how my schedule just worked out. I was not that by a long shot. I was this like chubby little emo chick in the back that just didn't fit in at all. And I remember he started talking and he starts writing on the board, and somebody raised their hand to ask a question and he berated them. And I realized, A, I don't know a thing he's talking about. I have no clue what I'm doing. And B, I'm certainly not going to ask any questions, right? Do you know what I mean?
But yeah, yeah, I kind of get that too.
Right. I failed every class that first year and then dropped out the year after that and never got my diploma because I went back and got my GED, and I'm good now, but like, man, yeah, like the education part of it I'm really sad about because I feel like I have a lot of raw intellect that was never able to be like really formed into the school formatting that we really need to go to
I think I
college.
understand that.
Um,
How did this experience? How has it affected you going into your adult life?
I can't name a way it hasn't. It's really probably easier to say ways that it hasn't, and I can't really think of a lot. It's weird. I still go back to therapy a lot. I think a lot of survivors don't end up ever going back to therapy. Um,
I think a
I
lot of them don't because you get
how could you?
you get assigned these therapists, and
Yeah.
then you end up not trusting these people because these people are all like, "Oh, I'm here to help," when that's not what they're doing at all.
Yeah. And yeah, it's and obviously I will say this, like therapy is just like any other profession. There are good and bad therapists, right? And so
Absolutely.
you can run into therapists that don't believe your story, think
Yeah.
you're exaggerating it, or simply I've had therapists when I've gone into my trauma history because it wasn't just that. After I left, because my brain was wired for trauma, it is what I sought out. It's my relationship with the father of my child, my marriage after that, my I've had employers that have treated me poorly. I've had friends that have treated me poorly, and I just put up with it because I feel like that's how people interact with me. Like it's been really weird as an adult to learn like, oh wait, I deserve to be treated well. Like,
I can get that. I can get that too.
and
Yeah.
it's really, it's come to a head. I did a lot of so last year, like when all this stuff was, I found out I went through a divorce at the same time I found out like the deep dark history of the TTI, and my brain just went, like along with COVID and everything else that happened. And I went back to like some intense therapy. I went to IOP. So I was doing like 20 hours of therapy a week for like 4 months straight last year. And it was really, really good for me because it helped me kind of like correct a lot of the incorrect thinking I had developed in there, and really come to terms with a lot of stuff I struggled with. But the weird part of it is that it got me working towards the life that I wanted. And in the
Okay.
past months, I've really gotten to a place where everything that I have wanted as an adult and really saw myself wanting as like that 13-year-old, right? That was in the program is here. My life today is very calm. There's not a lot of tension. People in my life know where my boundaries lie. My parents, who I had a very tumultuous, relationship with, we've finally come to a good spot where we understand each other. There's a lot of peace there. Um, Even things like the father of my child, who, like, if anybody who's been through a divorce and custody battles, like, if you get along with your ex, good for you. But I don't think most of us do, right? And so
I don't think
that,
a lot of them do, but I think some do.
and I
I've
do
seen
now,
good and
but it's
bad. I've never been married, but I've known people who have and then got
not easy.
divorces.
It's
And
not easy, right?
no, it's not easy at all.
But the thing is that it is, I have found myself day in and day out over the past 3 months feeling like I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. Like I'm waiting for somebody to come in and tell me that this. So I built a life where I have my own schedule now for work, which is amazing for me. It's what I've always wanted. But I keep waiting for somebody to come in and tell me you're being lazy. Why are you deciding to only do a half day's work today? Why are you not this idea of like constantly being productive and needing to be hard and mean to myself and
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
a
I get that. I
hyper
get
responsibility for everything that happens is still with me and sticks with me to this day. Like it's like they always taught us, you even everything that happens to you is your fault. Even if you didn't directly ask for the action or do anything wrong, you put yourself in a place where it could happen to you. So that's your fault. And things like this, right? And so I that's the biggest thing I can say is like I struggle to feel like it's okay to be happy. It's okay to be at peace and be happy.
Yes. I can relate to that and I understand that.
Yeah.
How has this experience affected the way you raise your children?
It was hard. So there's a lot that goes on with my son, but long story short, he didn't come to live with me full time until he was 10. And so I really only got him from 10 on, which is ironically about the time I started having a lot of problems. And so it has been very interesting. My parents were not really present from 10 on anyway. And so it's like I don't have a lot of us like when we think about parenting, for me at least, I know I go, well, what did I want when I was his age? And when I try and throw myself back to that time, I don't have parents' actions to think of. I have therapists. That's what I had raising me. I had therapists and techs and whoever wanted to work there really. And so that's what I would I would model for him. And I found that was actually another huge reason that I went into therapy, because I found myself yelling at him a lot. I was yelling at him so much over really dumb things and coming up with the most. He's like, "Where do you come up with these consequences? They're so weird." I'm like, "Bro, yeah, yeah." Like,
Yeah, yeah,
you
actually,
know,
yeah.
but I think it was when I found myself yelling at him a lot that I was like, "I need some help here, man," because like I just didn't want to. I even had one of his therapists tell me like, "You can't be a therapist to your kid. You got to be a parent to your kid, right? Like you sound like a therapist when you talk." I'm like, "Well, it's because I was raised by him, right? You know what I mean?" But like I had to really go back and learn how to be more human. I know that sounds really weird, but like tap into how I'm feeling and not psychoanalyze everything he did and turn it into like attack therapy. Like, it was more like this, this kid is a kid and he's gonna make mistakes. And that was like, I was way too hard on him for way too long. That's the biggest thing that I can think of is just like I wanted to be a parent and all I could be was a therapist. That's all I could be for a long time.
Gotcha. Well, Emily, thank you so much. I want to ask you one thing before we end this.
Okay.
If you could talk directly to the owners and these therapists and these staff members, uh, what would you like to say to them?
Well, I have talked to them directly, so they're aware a little bit, but
Okay.
I mean, like, but also more bluntly, I would say that's hard.
Yeah, no.
And I want to be succinct, which is not a talent of mine. But,
Okay. You can say anything you want.
I know it's almost it feels very emotional. You know what I
I
mean?
know it does.
I think the biggest thing that I would say is like whatever you are telling yourself, whatever gymnastics you're playing mentally to say you're helping people, I would really invite them to take a deeper look at what they get from this.
Gotcha.
And my guess is there's a lot of financial and reputation tied up in that. Um, but ultimately, if what you say you want to do is help people, continuing the program as it is not that.
Gotcha.
And just do some real deep self reflection on the fact that 30 years of kids going through that program plus, and I would say 80 to 90% of them saying, yeah, no, this is not good, is probably something to think on. I don't know, you know. So, yeah.
Anything
But
else you want to add?
no, they know how I feel.
Okay. Okay. Well, Emily, thank you so much for taking your time and giving this interview and telling your story. Trey Bender,
Yeah.
Program Stories, here
I'm
with
sorry.
Emily. Thanks, guys.
Oh, sorry.